Good day, good morning. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, coming to you with a live stream this morning on February 20th, a nice cold morning here in Calgary. We're going to be chatting today about the big speech from Alberta Premier Danielle Smith last night, broadcast at 6:45 Mountain Standard Time. Quite a landmark speech, one that'll probably be remembered when the books on her premiership are written. Where it goes, we're going to speculate. We're totally going to speculate, do our best to analyze here. But I want to involve you guys in this. You can post if you have comments, questions. Put it in the comments if you're watching this on X, YouTube, wherever. But also, you can call. I have not done the call-in before. We've just got set up for kind of the call-in here. You can join the conversation at 1-866-479-WEST, extension 711. You got the number right there at the bottom of the screen. 866-479-WEST, extension 711. You can call in. Hopefully you have something intelligent to say. If not, I'll hear you out anyway. But I know Corey and Marty up north have been doing the call-in feature on our shows lately. I've enjoyed watching and listening to that. Maybe we'll have fun here too. Okay, so let's talk about the speech. It's the reaction right across Canada has been furious, fast and furious response to what she's had to say. There is a series of referendum questions. We're going to get to that, but we'll kind of start with the earlier parts of her speech first. She talked about, there's a budget coming for Alberta next week. It's not expected to be good. Huge deficit, possibly a record deficit. Like most Alberta premiers who have had deficits, pointed to oil, and oil is down. And it is a mug's game trying to predict this stuff. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But anyone who could predict this stuff accurately would be a rich man. And the government got it wrong. And it's pretty common to get it wrong. It's difficult stuff to predict. But she's pointing to oil, and to some extent, oil is down quite a bit, but didn't really fess up to. She can't control that. No premier can control the price of oil. But what can you control? You can control your taxes, and you can control your spending. And controlling spending is not something that Alberta's government's been doing for a very, very long time. Spending has been wildly out of. Danielle Smith has, I think, run a pretty good government on a few different fronts. One of those fronts is not the budget. The budget's been a disaster. It's been a pretty free spending government. And she says, we're not going to slash spending or anything, but, we're going to limit spending to below inflation and population growth. That's helpful. If they would have done that for the last 3 years, we'd be in a better spot than we are now. J.C. Kenney, in his time as premier, did not cut spending. He limited growth in spending, and that was better than his predecessor, Rachel Notley, and Rachel Notley continued largely what her predecessor, Alison Redford, had done, which is just an Ed Stelmach before that. The budget is totally out of control, and there just doesn't seem to be any appetite in the government for cutting spending, which is what's necessary here. But she's talking about putting the brakes on spending increases. It's better than nothing, but it's not going to fix the problem here. We've got structural budget problems. And no one seems to really have the appetite to do anything serious about it. So, okay. One thing she did point to, though, that I think is a fair criticism that she's made, or I should say fair defense she's made about some of the spending problems we've got, is around immigration. We've had 600,000 people come into Alberta recently. Wild numbers that we simply cannot integrate, we cannot assimilate, we cannot make work in that kind of time. And so she's pointed to these numbers largely controlled by Ottawa, and put some of the blame on immigration. And I mean, the reaction to it from the usual suspects has been extremely predictable. Oh, you're blaming immigrants, blah, blah, blah. Rachel Notley, let me pull up this one. Rachel Notley more or less said that Danielle Smith is a Nazi. Let me see, where is this one? Hold on. This is, yeah, so Rachel Notley's response here, it's far from the craziest response, but it's definitely not out of line with a lot of the response we've seen. Rachel Notley says, Danielle Smith, making racism great again. First, they came for the trans people. Then they came for the unionized workers. Next, it was judges. Now it's immigrants. I think that you or someone you love won't be next. If you think someone you love won't be next, you're sorely mistaken. And then it goes on and on and on. But that's taking from a poem of a Lutheran pastor during the Second World War who was imprisoned, who wrote, first they came for the Jews because I was not a Jew, and then they came for the unions, etc. So this is Rachel Notley saying, controlling immigration, simply limiting the number of immigrants we have coming into Alberta, is Nazism. Nazism. This is it's the Alberta Reich. So it's predictable, crazy stuff. But no, we've got our schools are swamped. Anyone who knows a teacher in our big cities, particularly parts of our big cities in Alberta that have a significantly higher proportion of migrants in them, will tell you the big problem in our schools is that we've got a huge number of students who do not speak English adequately. In many cases, not at all. Like no English. There are a very significant number of students in our schools who speak no English. We've brought in people to this country who don't speak our language. And then in addition to people who speak no English, huge number who also speak poor English. And so you have completely dysfunctional classrooms where you can't focus on the lesson being taught because a huge number of the students can't understand what's being taught. So strains like that, or people who are coming in and are drawing on social services. They have not paid into this. They haven't been a part of the social contract. They have not been paying taxes in, but they're withdrawing services out. Maybe they're working, but they're working in low-wage jobs where they're not paying very much, if any, tax. But they're able to draw on social services. They're able to draw on healthcare. These kinds of things. And so this creates a huge net negative financial pressure on Alberta. In addition to all the social problems this obviously creates. So she pointed to this as one of the culprits, at least, for the budget deficit we have, some of the strain we've got on infrastructure, on education spending. And the usual suspects have just completely lost their minds. Okay. Then she proposed a series of referendum questions. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think it's 10. 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, it looks like 9. I'm going to go through each of these. It's pretty broad-ranging. Referendums they're not new to Canada. They're not new to Alberta, but they're not usual. They're very unusual in our system, and I generally favor us having at least some more direct democracy. But I'm not sure about this, the way this is having 9, 10 questions in addition to citizen initiative questions like independence, which is likely for a vote in the fall. So in I think it's October. What's the date we've got for this thing? John, can you find me the date of the referendum? I don't know why I don't have that handy. I should. So the Premier in her address laid out these questions. The first are a series of non-constitutional questions, largely the things that Alberta can do on its own. And the second are a set of constitutional questions that would require negotiation with the federal government and other provinces. So let's go through. We'll start with the non-constitutional questions. We'll call them the domestic Alberta questions first. Do you support the government of Alberta taking increased control over immigration for the purposes of decreasing immigration to more sustainable levels, prioritizing economic migration, and giving Albertans first priority on new employment opportunities? Okay. So, I mean, it's a big question, but and it's important. It wouldn't be a surprise to anyone that, yeah, of course we should. Of course, I think we should. But I'm wondering why that is a referendum question. Just do it. Like, why are we waiting until the fall to vote on this? Poll Albertans. The super majority of people, including most successful and integrated migrants, will agree with this. That yes, we should take control of immigration from Ottawa. Quebec is allowed to do it in large measure, so we should do it too. Let's send notice to Ottawa right now that we're demanding the same powers as Quebec has, and we're going to use those powers to limit migration to focus on economic migrants and prioritize Albertans getting jobs before we bring in people to fill those jobs. I think almost everyone, except for the Rachel Notleys and those types, are going to agree with this. I'm not sure why we have to wait until the fall to vote on this. We should just do it right now. And I think the government's got a mandate for it. We've been talking about this. This was, not hidden that this is something the UCP wants to do. The UCP has been talking about taking control of immigration for some time, especially since Danielle Smith became the leader of the party and the premier. Albertans know that this is something that's been in the books, that's been cooking. I don't know why we don't just do this. All right. Second question. Do you support the government of Alberta introducing a law mandating that only Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and individuals with an Alberta-approved immigration status will be eligible for provincially funded programs such as healthcare, education, and other social services? Okay. So what's implied there is that there will now be an Alberta-approved immigration status. In addition to the federal immigration status, Alberta will be... Alberta will decide, do we want someone here or do we not want this person here? And if Alberta does not want this person here, we're not going to give them social services funded by taxpayers. So healthcare, education, you could put in there driver's licenses, that kind of thing. Again, I'm not sure why we would vote on that. I think most people would agree. Of course, not everyone. No one agrees on everything, but I chance to say a majority of Albertans, including a majority of well-integrated and successful migrants, would agree with this. Let's just do it. Let's just go ahead and do it. All right. Next question was, assuming that all Canadian citizens and permanent residents continue to qualify for social support programs as they do now, do you support the government of Alberta introducing a law requiring all individuals with non-permanent legal immigration status to reside in Alberta for at least 12 months before qualifying for any provincially funded social support programs? I mean, that's pretty similar to the previous question number 2. Again, I think most people would agree with it. In fact, that's just common sense stuff. That's crazy that we're not already doing. And we don't need anyone's permission for that. We don't need Ottawa's permission for that. We should just do it. So again, this is a question that the Premier wants to put to a referendum that I agree on. I think it's good policy that we should do. But we should just do it. We should not wait until the fall to do it. I would be shocked if this kind of thing was defeated in a referendum question. Let's just make this government policy. Next one. Do you support the government of Alberta introducing a law requiring individuals to provide proof of citizenship, such as passport, birth certificate, or a citizenship card to vote in Alberta provincial election? Again, why the hell are we not? Are we actually going to have the referendum without checking people's proof of citizenship first? Absolutely, we should be checking proof of citizenship. And for all of you people saying, oh, it's fascism, it's racism, it's mean to ask people to show identity before voting, some kind of card before voting, just remember where you stood during COVID. when people had to show a special identification to get in and buy a sandwich at a restaurant or to get groceries. Groceries you didn't need it, but you had to, they made you mask up. But you want to go to a restaurant, you want to watch a movie, you want to do anything really, you had to show JCPenney's COVID vax card. So all of you who think that this is somehow racist and bigoted and fascistic to show identification and proof of citizenship when you're voting, just think about where you probably, in all chances, think about where you probably stood during COVID when people had to show identification to buy a bloody sandwich. Also, people saying, oh, some people, it's difficult for them to get ID and stuff. If you are too stupid to get an identification card, I don't want you voting. You're too stupid to vote. No, I don't agree that everyone should vote. It's everyone's duty to vote. No, if you're too stupid to be able to go get yourself a driver's license, you're probably too stupid to decide how much tax I should be paying. You're probably too stupid to decide what the foreign policy of our country should be. You're too stupid to figure those things out. You're doing society a favor by not voting. So it's a pretty low bar to set that you've got the IQ to go in and get a driver's license, some kind of identification. If you can't do that, or if you can't be bothered to do that, we shouldn't be bothered to count your vote. It's a pretty damn low bar to set. So again, I would have a hard time imagining most Albertans would have... oh, no, that was question 5. Question 5 should be up right now. There we go. I have a hard time imagining that most Albertans would have a problem with this. We're going to require proof that you're eligible to vote before we let you vote. I have to show proof that I'm eligible to drive a car before I'm allowed to drive a car. I have to show proof that I'm legally eligible to own a firearm before I'm allowed to own a firearm. When I go buy a gun at Cabela's, I have to provide my PAL. I have to provide my possession and acquisition license and show that I'm legally eligible to own a firearm. Why are we not required to do that when we vote? Now, I don't know what number of people are voting that are ineligible to vote. I can't say. I know some areas in the states it's rampant. It's there's probably significant scales of voter fraud taking place there. What scale here? I don't know. But it does become a bigger concern the more you have large numbers of people living in your society who are not citizens. When everybody living in an area is generally a citizen, it's less of an issue. It's less likely to be voter fraud of people who are ineligible to vote. It's going to be less of an issue, at least. Maybe not no issue, but it's going to be less of an issue. But when you've got massive numbers of people coming in who are not eligible to vote, it's something we got to be paying attention to. So again, I'm not sure why we're having a referendum on that. I like voting on stuff, I guess, but and citizens should have a right to vote on some things. That's why I like the idea of citizens' initiative, like we've got going on for the independence referendum. That's something that the political class considers a little too spicy to touch. Okay, I get that. I can appreciate that. But to their credit, the UCP strengthened the citizens' initiative legislation. First, they introduced it under Kennedy, but it was kind of unworkable at that time. Then they made it workable under Smith. So to their credit, they've brought this in. So when there's an issue that's too spicy, citizens can do an end run around the political class and require that we vote on this together, and people can vote yes or no. So that's good. That's a reason for a referendum. And I think on major constitutional questions, that's a place for people to vote in direct democracy. But this stuff is pretty standard. These 5 questions I've laid out here from the Premier's speech last night, these are pretty standard government policies that I think have broad support. I like, if people don't like them, the opponents can go and do a citizens initiative petition and bring in their own referendum to repeal these laws. When a government does something that's not broadly got a democratic mandate, that people don't broadly support, Like, think of the NDP, Rachel Notley's carbon tax. They did not have any democratic mandate to do that, but they had the legal right to impose it. Okay, so if we had citizens initiative legislation at that time, the people of Alberta could have gathered enough signatures and held a referendum on overturning that legislation. That'd be an appropriate way to do it. Similarly here, if people didn't like, the 5 points put out by Smith here, and she had just legislated it and passed by the legislature, then the opponents of this legislation could go out, collect the signatures, and try to overturn these laws. I don't think they'd be successful. Maybe they'd get enough signatures for a vote, but I doubt they'd win the vote. So I don't know, these 5 points around immigration, these are all very moderate things. Like, my only problem with these policies is that they probably don't go hard enough. We have been swamped. We have taken a migration model that, had its problems. I think it was over generous in the past, but it wasn't at least disastrous. And then we totally screwed the pooch. Ottawa screwed the pooch on it. And we've got to reverse that. We've got to engage at some level, at least, of humane remigration. She's not talking about anything like that. These are very moderate immigration policies, very moderate, that I think have got the broad support of the Alberta public. My only problem here, I have two problems. One is it's probably a little too light, but I'll take what we can get. This is a good step in the right direction, these policies. Okay. But why would we have a referendum on this? Just do it. Legislate this tomorrow. The legislature is in session. There's a budget next week. Everyone's there. Introduce the legislation. Pass it. Let's make this policy right now. Let's do it. Let's not wait for the fall in a referendum campaign. Let's just do it now. And if the opponents of these laws don't like it, guess what? We have citizens initiative legislation. Rachel Notley and these people can go out and they can go in, gather signatures in the cold, like independent supporters are doing right now. They can go out, they can gather signatures, and they can force a referendum on repealing this. I don't think they'll be successful, but, that's up to them. We'll see. I think that's the way to do it. I like a degree of direct democracy, but we do elect people for a reason, and that's to make decisions. Tough decisions, complicated decisions. And, Alberta has pioneered a degree of direct democracy in this to check the ability of the political class to run roughshod over to override the politicians if the politicians go astray. But this is what we elect people to do, to make decisions. Similarly, when Kenny was premier, we had 2 referendum questions held in conjunction with municipal elections. One was on getting rid of equalization, which, I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit, but that got completely ignored, obviously, by Ottawa. Nothing happened on equalization whatsoever. And the other one was around changing daylight savings time. I forget. It was pretty complicated. And that's the problem, is, like, I think broadly people don't like our system around daylight savings time. But people also didn't necessarily like the reform that was proposed in this referendum question. It was confusing. People don't know, because that's something that requires study. It's not a strict yes or no question on something. I don't even say it's simple, but say like independence. Do you believe Alberta should be an independent country or remain in Canada? People are going to have a thought about that. They're going to have strong feelings on it, and they're going to know which way to vote for the most part. Daylight savings time, I don't even remember how I voted. I remember I looked into it and I was like, I could go this way and go that way. But there was one proposal that a lot of people liked, which wasn't even an option. That's something that a committee of MLAs from both parties, NDP and UCP, could probably actually agree on. It's totally non-ideological. It's a technical question. Put it to a committee of MLAs, bring in some experts, they can study it, and then they just make a decision. And if we don't like it, we can have a citizens initiative to overturn it. That's the way our system should work. We elect people, we pay these people to study the issues and make a decision. And if we don't like the decision, we've got 2 options. We can throw them out the next election, or now, this is a new thing in our system, we can have a citizens initiative petition to trigger a referendum to overturn their decision. And I think these first 5 referendum questions concerning immigration fall into the category of this is what we elect you to do. Just do it. Do these things right now. Immigration is a problem right now, and it's something we got to deal with right now. And this is not a constitutional question. This is just a straight up policy question. This probably got pretty broad public buy-in for these kinds of measures. So just do it. I don't know why we have to have a referendum on it. I'm probably a bit more forgiving, not entirely, but I'm a bit more forgiving on the second round of questions, the constitutional ones. Let's talk about these. All right. The first constitutional question is, do you support the government of Alberta working with the governments of other willing provinces to amend the Canadian Constitution to have provincial governments and not the federal government select the justices appointed to the Provincial King's Bench and appeal courts? Okay. Well, that's interesting. Premier Smith has talked a bit about this, that, Quebec has some say in the appointments over federal judges in its area, and Alberta should too. The problem is Quebec got that without a constitutional amendment. Quebec got that because they're Quebec. They're special. They get a say over Supreme Court justices that are appointed for the 3 Quebec seats. Quebec actually kind of gets a de facto veto over even Alberta's seat on the Supreme Court because they have to be bilingual now, and there's really not many fully bilingual Albertans. It's a very, very small number because there's really no functional reason to, outside of like a couple small communities, like maybe like Lac-La-Biche and stuff in the northern part of Alberta. Other than some very small communities, there's not a lot of French mother tongue speakers in Alberta. And there's no practical reason to really be learning French growing up in Alberta unless your parents want you to be a Supreme Court justice or the Prime Minister. There's 9 Supreme Court justices in the country, one of which sometimes goes to Alberta. So 1, and then Prime Minister. So there's like 2 job openings where you got to speak French. Or unless you want to move to Ottawa and be a bureaucrat or something. It's just, in terms of, the effort we put into our kids' education, we just don't put a ton into making them fluently and permanently bilingual because it doesn't make any economic sense. You're way more likely to run into someone who speaks Punjab in Alberta than someone who speaks French. You're way more likely to run into someone who speaks Mandarin or Cantonese than someone who speaks French. So anyways, I've got to get I'm getting off track here, but Quebec gets a big say over the judges, and they even kind of get an indirect say on the judges from our part of the country. So what Danielle Smith is asking for here is reasonable, and I do think most provinces probably would like this power, that our appellate courts, Court of King's Bench, things like that, that the provinces are able to select those justices. That makes good sense. This is good. This is a good constitutional reform, but I don't think it goes anywhere likely because Quebec more or less already gets this without a constitutional amendment, just because they're Quebec. And Quebec will not agree to amend the Constitution for things we want unless they get all the other things they want. And then we're into the big grab bag of issues like Meech Lake and Charlottetown, where they're going to ask for things that we can't possibly give them. Second question. Do you support the government of Alberta working with the governments of other willing provinces to amend the Canadian Constitution to abolish the unelected federal Senate? Okay. Again, you're going to run into the same kind of political issue around it. Quebec is not going to allow this because even if Quebec wanted to get rid of the Senate, they won't agree to get rid of the Senate on just a one-off issue here because they're going to want all their language and cultural issues put in and separate status, asymmetrical federalism. They want all of that enshrined in the Senate, a la Meech Lake and Charlottetown. That's what they want. And they're not going to agree to give us anything unless they get that. And we can't give them those things because those things create an even less fair federation. Also, I'm not sure we want no Senate. Would no Senate be better than the current Senate? Yes, it would. The current Senate is grossly unfair. It's appointed by the Prime Minister. So most of the time it's just appointed by Liberals without any real Democratic mandate from Alberta. So even Alberta senators, quote unquote, are not, they're not even appointed by someone who has the backing of Alberta in most cases. And the numbers in the Senate are crazy. Roughly a quarter of the seats are for Ontario. Roughly a quarter are for Quebec. And, the territories, I think, get one each or something. And then things get completely screwy. Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, I think we get 6 each. Alberta alone has roughly 3 times the population of all 4 Atlantic provinces. Roughly 3 times the population of all 4 of the Atlantic provinces. Newfoundland and Labrador, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. New Brunswick alone has nearly twice the senators of just Alberta. New Brunswick alone has nearly twice the senators of Alberta. But Alberta has 3 times the population of all 4 of those provinces. And that's set in stone for all time. It doesn't change based on populations of a province going up or down. It's just set in stone for all time. So the current Senate is practically medieval in the way it's designed. It wildly discriminates against the Western provinces. Wildly. So would no Senate be better? Yes. But here's the thing. There is no functional federation in the democratic world that doesn't have a balanced upper legislative chamber of some kind. So the U.S. Senate, the German Bundesrat, the Australian Senate. We're talking democratic countries that are also federations. Britain is evolving, the United Kingdom is evolving into a quasi-federation. And so its House of Lords is probably going to need a shakeup at some time too. But among actual federations in the democratic world, every single one has a functional upper house of some kind that represents the subnational units. In the United States, it's very simple. Every state has 2 senators, and that's it. Those senators used to be actually appointed by the state governments until roughly the turn of the 20th century. Then they became directly elected. I actually think that was a mistake, because the idea was to integrate the state governments with the federal government, make them coordinate with each other. In Germany, the Bundesrat, that's the upper house of the German parliament, they don't all have an equal number, but the smaller states, small ones like Saarland, have more. Let's call them senators for shorthand here. They have more than their population would normally account for, and bigger ones would have less. But the bigger states, like North Rhine-Westphalia, will have more senators than Saarland, but not as much as if it was straight representation by population, the way it is in their lower house of parliament, the Bundestag. So that's another way. And those senators are directly appointed by the state Länder governments. So when there's a state election in Germany, the delegation to their Senate, the Bundesrat, it turns over. And so you've got direct collaboration from the state governments into the federal government. There's different ways of doing it, but they've all got some version of having an upper house representing the subnational units or subnational governments, and gives some greater representation to the smaller provinces, the smaller states, the smaller Länder. If Canada got rid of the Senate, we would be the only democratic federation on the planet that I'm aware of that has no upper house. And it's an important function. Otherwise, the big provinces or the big states, say Ontario, California, New York, North Rhine-Westphalia, they would too easily dominate the smaller ones. This is a protection for the smaller and even the mid-size subnational units. So I don't like the idea of having no Senate. But I mean, if you gave me a straight up or down question between no Senate and the current Senate, we'd have to pick no Senate. The current Senate is we're a fairly big province in Canada, not as big as Ontario, Quebec, but we're fairly big. But we have less say than the big ones, and we have less say than the really small ones. So it makes no sense. So I don't know. Smith has put forward the position. I think it was first famously put forward by Brad Wall when he was the Premier of Saskatchewan, just getting rid of the Senate. I'm not sure I like this one. Again, if it's just a binary decision between current status quo Senate and no Senate, I take no Senate. But I don't think you can have a functional federation without some kind of functional and legitimate upper house of parliament. All right, next question. Do you support the Alberta government working with the governments of other willing provinces to amend the Canadian Constitution to allow provinces to opt out of federal programs that intrude on provincial jurisdiction, such as health, education, and social services, without a province losing any of the associated federal funding for use in its social programs? That's kind of something like that. That's something that Quebec has actually wanted. For itself, not necessarily for other provinces. But Quebec doesn't really care if other provinces have it or not. Just the dynamics have been that they demand it for themselves. That is something you probably would get the backing of Quebec on. But again, they generally will not open the door to the Constitution at all unless they get their grab bag of sovereigntist, Quebecois nationalist issues. They're not going to give you anything unless they get those things. But this is an item Quebec wants. My problem is that the provinces should lose the associated federal funding. The federal government should have no role at all in funding healthcare. It should have no role at all in funding social services because these are areas of provincial jurisdiction. They are illegitimately involved in the federal government's illegitimately involved in funding healthcare and social services. That is the jurisdiction of the provinces. The federal government's been allowed to weasel its way in by funding these things on a provincial level, and then could you let Dave know we got a 10 o'clock meeting? We've got to move that back. They're able to then attach strings to the funding that's involved. Well, there just should be no funding, period. Because if Ottawa is funding something, it should be allowed to attach strings to it. So the answer is to not allow them to fund it. But I get, some of the poorer provinces, Quebec, Atlantic provinces, Manitoba, they don't want to lose the funding that comes along with it. So I don't know. I get where she's going on that one. And you know what? This would be better than the status quo. So I don't want to make the good the enemy of the perfect, or perfect the enemy of the good. It'd be a significant improvement on the status quo. But one of the reasons for this is so that we subsidize other provinces less. That should be something we want. It's just obviously not something most other provinces are going to agree to. And the last constitutional question. Do you support the government of Alberta working with other willing provinces to amend the Canadian Constitution to better protect provincial rights from federal interference by giving a province's laws dealing with provincial or shared areas of constitutional jurisdiction priority over federal laws when the province's laws and the federal laws conflict? I got to give that one more thought, but that one strikes me as potentially negative, and negative in an Alberta way in particular. A lot of critics of Alberta sovereignty, and sovereignty not being just full independence, but people, Danielle Smith says a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. A lot of the critics of that, pro Ottawa types, they don't understand, when they say, well, Alberta's demanding that pipeline should go through BC over BC's wishes. The idea isn't that. The idea is division of powers, not that the provinces should have unlimited power. The idea is about clear delineation and separation of powers. An interprovincial infrastructure, infrastructure that crosses provincial boundaries, is supposed to be a federal national jurisdiction. So, perhaps I'm trying to read this charitably. I'm trying to read it charitably, but I could see areas where this would be in our favor, but I can see areas like, say, pipelines, where this would not be good, where this would say, okay, well, BC's got some jurisdiction on this, and Ottawa's got some jurisdiction on this, and so BC or Quebec, they just get to veto a pipeline. Again, if someone's reading this differently than me, put it in the comments or call in. I want to hear it out. I could go both ways on this, but the way I'm reading this one right now, I'm not sure it's good for a functioning federation. The idea, a good federation should have maximum powers as low as possible, as close to the people as possible at the subnational and at the local levels. And those subnational units delegate powers to higher levels of government, say the federal government, where cooperation among jurisdictions is required. Things like national defense, things like foreign policy, infrastructure that crosses boundaries, currency, that kind of thing. Those are the kind of things that we want delegated to the so-called higher levels of government. So I see this proposal as potentially problematic. I'm going to have to suss it out a bit more. I'm not saying it's not a hard no, but that one's a soft no right now. I'm not sure. On some things, it should be pretty clear. Should Ottawa be allowed to ban paper straws in Alberta? What possible national benefit does that serve? Why does every province have to have ban plastic straws? Sorry. Why does every province have to have no good straws? Why does every province have to have paper straws? There's no good reason I can think of why all 10 provinces and all 3 territories have to have the exact same law on straws. That's an area where obviously the subnational units should win out. There's no national interest in banning old-fashioned great plastic straws. Okay. But infrastructure crossing provincial boundaries, pipelines, power lines, railroads, highways, canals, these kinds of things, that is clear area of national interest. And you can quibble about it. If an individual project is a good thing or a bad thing, that's circumstantial. That's something that should be federal. So I don't know. I think I appreciate the spirit of where that referendum question's coming from, but I think it's got to be sussed out a bit more. Okay. At the end of it all, though, 4 of those 5 constitutional referendum questions that the Premier is going to put to Albertans in the fall, I'm a pretty hard yes on. 3 of the 5 I'm a hard yes on. 1 I'm a soft yes. Another I'm a soft no. But here's the thing. We're going to get ignored again because we just did this a couple of years ago. Do you remember when we had this referendum on equalization that we were going to use the Clarity Act ruling around Quebec secession that says that if a province has a referendum and achieves a clear majority on a clear question of constitutional importance, that the federal government and other provinces are constitutionally obliged to negotiate in good faith on that question. Doesn't mean they have to agree, but it means they have to negotiate in good faith. Alberta had a referendum on equalization, and a big majority voted to abolish it from the Constitution. And what happened next? Can we play crickets? Do you have a cricket? You have crickets on the soundboard? Can we play crickets? I don't know. No. Oh, I wouldn't set up. I didn't warn him to do it. Just flying by the seat of my pants here. It was crickets. Now, I guess to be fair, the Premier at the time, Jason Kenney, had lost all political capital. His premiership was in the process of collapsing over his actions during COVID, over his failure to press Ottawa harder on a lot of issues. So he didn't really have a lot of political capital to go with. But he nonetheless sent a letter to Ottawa saying Albertans have voted to abolish equalization and let's talk. I don't think he even got we could do crickets. I don't hear crickets.
No, there was a call.
Oh, there's a call.
Yeah, and then he hung up.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I missed the call. All right. Sorry. If you're calling in, you can call back here. Sorry. I thought we figured out crickets on the soundboard. Sorry. We'll be set up for next time. I love crickets. Nothing happened. I mean, if Quebec holds a referendum on a constitutional question, you better believe everyone's coming to the table, and we're treating Quebec very politely and nicely and asking them to, maybe negotiate down what they're asking for. But Alberta did it. Big majority voted to scrap it from the Constitution. And it was nothing. It was crickets. We didn't even get a letter back from Ottawa. They didn't even tell us to pound sand. They just didn't answer the door. We rang the doorbell and no one came. We heard the party inside. We just weren't invited in. They didn't even open the door. I'm not even sure they peered through the window to see who was there. So my concern is we're going to hold these referendum questions and we're going to get ignored. That's not a reason necessarily to not hold it, though. I've always said, like when I was in the Alberta legislature, I was the first elected member of the Alberta legislature since 1982 who openly supported Alberta holding a referendum on independence. Maybe you kids weren't ready for that. Maybe you guys aren't ready for that, but your kids are going to love it. It was maybe ahead of its time, but I felt at that time that Alberta needed to start moving in the direction of independence. But some people thought it was too soft a policy because the policy was called equality or independence. Because, and some of the more hardcore of you are not going to like to hear this, but this is the reality. A majority of Albertans will never vote for independence unless they believe that Alberta has exhausted all other attempts at good faith negotiation for equality and fairness in Canada first. They're just not going to be prepared to pull the trigger on a admittedly pretty radical idea of becoming their own sovereign and independent country unless they are confident that we have tried everything else first. Similarly, the American founding fathers and the Continental Congress, they sent the American Revolution was shooting for a year before they declared independence. They were literally fighting a war for a year against the British Empire for a whole year before they declared independence. And before they declared independence, they sent the olive branch petition to the king. And then the king responded, go to hell, I'm going to hang you all for treason. But they reached out to the king for redress, saying, like, we're your loyal subjects. We want to stay a part of Mother England, the British Empire. We love Britain. We just want to be treated fairly. We want representation with taxation. I mean, see, either seats in Parliament or that the 13 colonial legislatures have more power than they currently do. It can't be overridden by Parliament and the king. They sent a very reasonable proposal to the king called the olive branch petition, extending an olive branch of peace to the king. And it was the king's response saying, to hell with you all, I'm going to hang you all for treason. Then the Continental Congress voted with about a hook and crook unanimously for independence. It's a very different circumstance in Alberta where no one's shooting each other, no one's talking anything that crazy. But I think the principle remains that a majority of Albertans will not vote for independence unless they believe that every possible measure that can be taken to make it work in Canada first has been done. If we don't do that, the moderates who are maybe sympathetic to independence and angry and have grievances with the federal government or other parts of Canada, they're not going to vote for it unless they understand that. And yes, I'm probably in the chats here, we're going to get people saying, hey, we've been trying forever. We had the Reform Party. Before we had Social Credit. We had the Reform Party. We had the Canadian Alliance. We've tried all of these things and they've always ignored us. You're right. And I think it's a practically 0% chance that we get major constitutional reform on the Senate, on dividing federal and provincial jurisdiction, on equalization. I think the chances of that are damn near 0%. It's not happening. As long as Quebec holds a veto over the Constitution in this country, it's not happening. Because what we would have to do to get those things would be giving up even more. So, those of you, I got one guy saying, we have done that already. I agree we have, but here's the problem. I'm not Gen Z here, but I've studied history. And I know the history of this. My family were in the Reform Party. I grew up knowing about this stuff. Alberta, Cora here. Over 100 years of being treated unjustly isn't enough for Albertans. Donovan Kelly, we've already done that. Majority of the 30% that voted were obviously NDP voters. I'm not sure what that is. But anyway, I totally expect this. We've tried it all before, and we've gotten nowhere. Remember Preston Manning and the Reform Party? That was started in 1987. We've tried this forever. We've gotten almost nowhere. I agree. But there's a lot of people who do not have that institutional memory right now, particularly younger people who get to vote. They don't remember Preston Manning. The Reform Party started when I was 2 years old. I know this stuff because, I've been a political junkie. I studied history. I studied politics. I know this stuff. And I grew up with a lot of it. But I was still a little kid. So older people might remember this. But a lot of younger people don't. And even older people, they've forgotten this. So, yeah, I agree. Putting forward reasonable proposals for constitutional reform to make things work in Canada is probably a non-starter. Just like the equalization referendum. It's going to go nowhere. But I think there is value in at least letting the rest of Canada say no. And who knows? I hope I'm wrong. I've always wanted Canada to work. I grew up as a Canadian nationalist. I grew up loving Canada, believing it was the greatest country in the world. And, for a time, it probably was. Although everybody thinks the country's the greatest, at least in the West. It was a great country. But that country is lost now. And I don't think it's capable of reforming itself. I think it's probably past the point of no return at this point. I hope they would say yes. I don't think they will. I think the chances are extraordinarily small. But I think we owe it to our own history, our own heritage, and our institutions to try. Just try. It's, think of it as a marriage is at a total dead end road. You got to at least go to counseling once. You got to sit down with a counselor once before the courts will let you go to the courthouse and get your divorce. They're going to require you have to sit down with a counselor at least once, look each other in the eyes and say, I still hate you. You got to do that. And who knows? Maybe we fall in love again. Probably not. But at the very least, at a minimum, even if for those of you who say there's a 0% chance, I think it is important that we do this, if nothing else, so that your fellow Albertans know that the rest of Canada has no interest in fixing the Constitution, fixing the country. Give them the chance to say no. And who knows? Maybe I'm naive, but I think there's probably a 1% chance they say yes. And I hope it's a lot more than 1. But I think it's about 1%. They're just not going to do it. And I hope I'm wrong. So, okay. Missy Forever says the referendum will prove that the Constitution doesn't work because they won't do anything. I'm not sure that proves the Constitution doesn't work, but it might prove that federal reform doesn't work because they are very likely to do nothing. That's people on both sides are going to say, well, the rest of the country will do nothing. And, the Federalists who say, well, why are we holding these referendums? They're going to do nothing. Well, you're kind of proving our point that the rest of the country doesn't give a shit. You're kind of making that point. So anyway, let the rest of Canada say no. We have to say yes to compromise ourselves. We have to say yes to compromise. We have to say yes to good faith negotiations. And then we see what they have to say. It's very likely going to be no. Very likely going to be no. But give them the chance to say no. And if they say no, then, during the independence referendum campaign, when you go knock on a door and someone says, hey, I want to work it out, you find someone who's not a elbows up forever Canada guy, people, but you find someone who's a bit more moderate in the middle and they say, yeah, I get independence, but I'm not there yet. I really think we should. I really think we got to make Canada work. Well, you could talk about the history of the Reform Party and the Wild Rose and all of these things till you're blue in the face. But chances are most normal people haven't experienced that. Most people haven't opened up the history books and remembered Preston Manning railing about a Triple E Senate in a church basement in 1988. You know, they're just not going to remember that. They have to know it for themselves. So at least to be able to look them in the eyes and say, hey, you probably voted to reform the Constitution, and these guys said no. So at a minimum, I think it strengthens the hands of the of an independence campaign if the rest of Canada says no after we've put forward good faith reforms to the Constitution first. So that's me trying to be a pragmatist. But on the logistics of this all, so this is, I think, what? It was nine referendum questions, is it? 9 or 10? 9? I think it's 9. But we're probably going to have 10 referendum questions, I think, because there is that citizens' initiative referendum on independence. Can't be sure, but if I'm a betting man here, I'm betting they get the signatures to trigger an independence campaign, a referendum campaign, which would also be held probably, I think, at the same time. October 19th. October 19th. How is this going to work? So, like 9 referendum questions minimum on the same day. It's going to feel a little bit like California. California's crazy. They'll vote on, like, should we build this overpass on this particular highway or this, LRT line? It's a bit crazy how much they vote on things. Again, I think there is definitely a role for direct democracy. I don't think it's for every little issue there is, but that's California. We're going to have 9. Where does the independence referendum fit in on that? Does it get held the same day and it's just one of 10 options? If so, that would seem an effort to help that referendum probably lose. I know people could reasonably take both sides of this argument. I know the Federalist side, they're going to say these 9 referendum questions are designed to help an independence referendum win. And I've seen some of that from the usual crowd on X. I don't think so. I think it hurts it, because then a bunch of people who would otherwise vote for independence, they can say, well, I'm not all the way there. I'll vote for these more moderate options of we're going to take control of immigration and we're going to demand constitutional reform. I see it as weakening their hand. So we don't know the timing because the petition has not been successful in getting enough signatures. That's ongoing. I think the way this should work is that if the Premier says we're going to have these we're going to vote on these 9 items October 19th. I think if we have a successful petition drive for a referendum on independence, which again I think they're very, very likely to get the signatures for that, it should be scheduled for perhaps a month afterwards. I don't know what day of the week it is, but roughly like November 19th, as long as it's not a weekend or a holiday or something. November 19th or early in the new year, something like that. It should be after. So you give Albertans a chance to vote on these questions here. You have immigration reform, etc. Okay. And then you've got the constitutional questions. You've got to give then a little bit of time, a reasonable amount of time. So maybe more than a month. You also don't want to do it during Christmas. But you have to give the other provinces and the federal government time to consider these questions. To consider, okay, Alberta says we want to get rid of the Senate. We want the provinces to appoint their appellate court judges for their own provinces. We want to allow a clearer separation of powers on things like healthcare, social policy, and we want the provincial legislation to trump federal legislation where there's shared jurisdiction. Okay. And then you allow the other provinces and the federal government time to consider it. And if they ignore it or they say no, well, then Albertans can be informed by that reaction when they go a month, 2-3 months later to vote on the potential independence question. They should not be voting on the same day because these are very big things. Why would you vote? Because if people voted for independence, I know it's a minority opinion right now. We got a poll coming out today. It's in the mid-30s. It's around 34%, 34, 35. I think it gets up to 38%. We had a poll. We polled Albertans, a pretty big sample size, 1,500 people. We asked, if the pipeline MOU deal between Danielle Smith and Mark Carney falls through, how do you vote on independence? I could be getting this wrong, but off the top of my mind, I think it gets near 38%. That's not striking distance, but that's getting into competitive territory for a referendum. But why would you be voting on constitutional reforms at the same time? Proposals for constitutional reforms, and you have no idea how the rest of the country is going to react to them. Well, why would you be voting on those on the exact same day as independence? Like, that's very conflicting. That's sending very conflicting messages. Also, if, say, the reform proposals pass, but the independence one fails, then you've completely wasted all of your leverage for actually negotiating with the other provinces. So I think what would make a lot more sense is that, the 9 questions put forward by Premier Smith, those get voted on October 19th. If we're actually going to vote on all these things, and, as I've already said, I'm not sure they should all be referendum questions. Some of them should just be enacted as policy immediately. But we're going to vote on these things October 19th. And then we give, say 3 months from October 19th. So say January 19th, roughly, as long as it's not a weekend or something. Something like January 19th, roughly, 2027. Then we can vote on the Citizens Initiative referendum on independence. And if in those 3 months, the rest of Canada has found Jesus, and we reform the Constitution, we either get rid of the Senate or we reform the Senate into something democratic, something with more fair representation to acknowledge that the country's population among provinces has changed a bit since 1905, when Alberta and Saskatchewan were admitted as provinces and assigned our senators and never changed since. That we reform the Senate, we reform the Constitution around areas of shared jurisdiction, appointment of judges. We get some significant constitutional reform in Canada. I'll vote against independence. I mean, yeah, if we could fix this place, that's the best. I want my Canada back. I don't think I'm going to get it back. I think it's gone. But if we can get our Canada back, shit, I'll vote against independence. But we're probably not going to get it. I don't know. The gong went off in the background. Something big happened in the news. I don't know. Jackson's chuckling here. Look, I'm going to scratch his beard, his mustache. No, I can't do it. Anyway, picking on him. We used to have David Vajcnik sitting here, but we caught him eating noodles once live on air, and we blew up a big picture of him savagely eating noodles, and he's been ashamed of it ever since. So he moved his seat. No one likes to sit there. That's the chair. Anyway, it'd be crazy to have the referendums all on the same day. Having the referendum for these 9, especially the 4 constitutional questions from Danielle Smith, along with 5 domestic immigration questions, on the same day as the independence question, makes no sense. That is a bad idea. Have these 9 questions. The first 5, you should actually just make policy and do it. We shouldn't even have a referendum on that. Let opponents of it trigger an initiative vote if they want to. But either way, have at the minimum the constitutional questions that Premier Smith is proposing. Have those on October 19th. 3 months later in January, then we can have the Citizens Initiative vote on independence. And there's some flexibility on the part of the government to schedule when exactly that's going to be. I think that makes sense. That way, when Albertans go to likely vote on independence, they're going in with their eyes wide open. We have voted on a series of constitutional reforms that I'm not even thrilled about, but they're compromises. These are very watered down compromises, but might be good enough. We put that forward and we see the reaction. And so when Albertans go to vote on independence, they're not doing it the same day wondering how the rest of the country would react to these constitutional amending proposals. When they go to vote on independence, they know how Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and Ottawa, we know how they have responded. We know if they have said, yes, these are reasonable proposals and we're willing to sit down and negotiate in good faith. or if they've said pound sand, or if they've just ignored us, again, as they did on the equalization vote. I think Albertans would then make a much more informed decision. And frankly, if the rest of the country has told us to pound sand or ignore it, it probably strengthens the hand of the independence campaign, because the rest of the country will have rejected negotiation at that point. It was the old policy I ran on. It was not very successful with in 2019. Equality or independence. Because I know some of you don't want to hear this. Just independence without making it very clear and real and visceral for people in the middle that equality with other provinces has to be achieved first. They're not going to vote for independence. You're at we're going to go to a call. We got a call now. Let's patch you in.
Hello, Derek.
Hello. Who am I talking to?
Actually, you're touching on exactly. My name's Jesse from GP.
Sorry, what's your name? I didn't hear you clearly.
Jesse from GP.
Jeffy from GP. How you doing, Jeffy?
Good, thanks. Great show. Love the call-in format. Keep it up. I missed Corey yesterday, but I'll try and get off work to call into him as well.
Oh, thank you.
What I'm calling about is actually what you're talking about right now. So you've already touched on it. Is a lot of people are calling for the referendum now, and it can't be now. People need to understand that. As much as they want it to happen, we're not there yet, right? We have a lot of the support for it, but we need to campaign for it. So I just wanted to.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's exactly that. Look, I know the independence crowd. I've rolled with these people a long time, and I get it. You know, they want it. They just want it so bad. They want to do it now. But, you know, growing up, our parents teach us about delayed gratification. You know, do you want half a cookie now, or do you want a full cookie later? You know, after you do your chores. And we don't even get it. If we just have a vote, we get to blow off this steam, and then we lose. Do you know how much it would suck to lose? Mm-hmm. I mean, even if we do everything right, it's still a pretty big uphill battle. You know, the polling we've got coming out today, you guys can check it out at westernstandard.news. Should be out any time. Independence sits around 34% on a generic question, with undecideds removed. And I think, as I said, it gets up to around 38-ish, 38 give or take, if the pipeline MOU between Smith and Carney falls through. Okay, that's a respectable number. That's a big number. But guess what? It's not the 51 you need. It's not the 51% you need.
Exactly.
And we're not Quebec. We're not going to get to do
That's
this
right.
over and over. You know, like, we got one shot. So if we're going to do it, like, hold a referendum right now, why? Just to feel good about it? I mean, that's crazy. Let's take the time, try to achieve reform in Canada, which I don't think is really possible, but at least make a good faith attempt, and maybe we're successful. And at the minimum, everybody else could see that we've been rejected with good faith proposals, and then you'll have a better chance at your referendum, you know?
Exactly. And the more we get declined from wishes, and let's say the federal election is called within the next couple of months, 6 months, whatever, the referendum will pass after the Liberals gain a majority, which they will. Again. So people just need to wait for that full cookie, as you said, in my opinion. Slow the roll. Let's campaign. Let's canvass. Let's get as much momentum as we can. Get as much information out there as we can. And I'll leave you with that. But I do want to say one last thing. Good. Everybody, get a subscription to the Western Standard and stop watching the CBC.
That's the best advice I've heard all week. Thank you very much, Jeffy from GP. All right, thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you, Jeffy. Yeah, well, and you know, the polls are looking pretty good for the federal Liberals. We've got one out. Actually, we put it out last night. We put out 2 poll questions last night. We polled 1,500 people through Main Street Research, so a very big sample size for Alberta. It had the Liberals, federal Liberals, pretty close on the heels of the Conservatives in Alberta. Now, John, pull up the images from those two stories, the federal and the provincial one. Let's pull up the federal one first. We'll throw it up on the screen here. I didn't believe it. The federal Liberals have never been near tied the Conservatives or previous iterations with the Alliance or Reform. They have never been even close to tied, really, since Diefenbaker. Diefenbaker wiped the Liberals out as a dominant prairie party in the 1950s, and the Liberals have not been anywhere close to tied with the Conservatives or Reform, etc., ever since the 1950s. So I talked to the pollster Keto Maggie. I was like, I'm not buying this one, and but the problem is the other questions we asked on, say, provincial voter intention or on independence, they all kind of lined up with the conventional wisdom. It showed the UCP well ahead of the NDP on the provincial voter intention. It showed independence in the mid-30s. That's pretty decent, higher than some other polls, but within the realm of conventional wisdom. So actually, it's possible. I want to see some other polls. Like, just because we paid for this poll doesn't mean it's the be-all end-all. So maybe it's wrong. But let's scroll. Okay, let's scroll down and show this federal poll here. Where's the image? There it is. So there's federal voter intention in Alberta, according to this Main Street poll commissioned by Western Standard. Sample size of 1,500. That's a pretty big sample size. You could go bigger, but it's kind of diminishing returns at that point. So I don't know if that's true. But I think the impact of the Liberals winning a majority government, and also they're going to get the majority government by floor crossers anyway. They've already got a de facto majority. I think it's actually already baked in. I think people angry at the Liberals winning, bringing supporters to independence, I think it's already kind of baked into the price at this point with independent support. So I think the Liberals winning a majority, maybe it gives a small bump, but I don't think it gives a particularly big bump. Here, now, do you have the provincial vote numbers there? No, that'd be a different story. All right. All right. Don't worry about that for now. So I think that's baked in. We got a super chat. I've never done super chats before. Let's super chat. $20 from JP Alberta First. If Smith was being serious and not just gaslighting Albertans, she would hold her referendum questions on June 2nd, 2026, including the Lukaszuk question. October should be for the independence question. Okay. Okay, JP, I think thanks for the super chat, by the way. I've never done super chats before. Really appreciate it. Yeah, if you do super chats, even if you insult me, you could say anything about me. As long, well, if you give $1, I'm not going to put an insult up. But $20, you can insult me. It costs $20 to make fun of me, and I will read your comments. You can make fun of my hair, my beard, the way I talk. You can make fun of me for money. I'll be it's like the dunk tank at the carnival. I'll be the guy. I take your point. I think I think JP Alberta First is saying something pretty similar to what I'm saying, except he's just saying to do it earlier. That she could have her referendum questions along with Lukaszuk's question. I don't think Lukaszuk's question's coming up for a vote because he seemed to realize after he got the signatures that he doesn't actually want a referendum. He had triggered his own independence referendum. He's like, oh, I didn't read the legislation. So I'm not sure we're actually going to vote on that. But anyway, so have her referendum questions. JP Alberta First wants to do it in June and then have the independence vote in October. So we're on the same page that those questions should be held before the independence vote. I agree with that. But I think you want more time for a referendum. I mean, independence, it's a big deal. And frankly, like the movement, I've been in the movement. And it's not as old and well-developed as it is in Quebec. In Quebec, they developed all these cultural institutions around this stuff, and they spent decades before they even had their first referendum. Then another roughly 15 years before their second referendum. And it's been God knows how long. 1995, they might have another referendum in the next 1 to 3 years. Who knows? More runway is not a bad thing. I know some of you just want to start shooting. You just want to pull the trigger and vote on it now because it's going to feel good. But it's not going to feel good if you get slaughtered. And having more time allows a more thoughtful campaign. It allows people to consider this idea, because guess what? It is a radical idea. Forming your own country is a radical idea. Radical, Canadians have all been taught radical equals a bad thing. Anything that is not, if you have three numbers, 1, 2, and 3, Canadian always picks 2. They always pick what's in the middle. Canadians have been conditioned to think that anything big, anything aspirational, anything outside the box is bad. Anything radical equals bad. And radical often equals bad anywhere, but not always. We've done radical things before that have been good. We've done radical things that are bad, but this is a radical proposal, and it's going to take time for people to take it in. Because remember, you're talking to your friends. I have a beer with my buddies in my barn. We got a big Alberta flag and Wild Rose Country mud flaps on the wall. We sit around and we all agree, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't. It's a lot of people need some convincing here. And in the Federalist circles, they say, well, everyone I know is a Federalist. They're forever Canada, and we love Jason Kenney and Naheed Nenshi and Thomas Lukaszuk. And anyone who doesn't think like that is crazy. I don't know anyone who's not a Federalist. These separatists are crazy. I don't know any. Well, guess what? We have the same problem on our side too. We roll in our circles, and we tend to talk with people who agree with us more often than not. There's a lot of people who got to be won over here. And so having more time, especially after a series of referendum proposals where we Albertans are being the reasonable ones proposing amendments to the Constitution, compromises to make Canada work, let Canada stew on that. Let them, give them a reasonable amount of time to consider it and come back to the table. Give some time for that to happen. I know some of you just want to vote now. It's a bad idea. And I know that's always been the attitude of so many people in the independence movement. I was in it when it was not a very popular idea at all, when it was pretty fringe. So, I don't take positions on things to be popular. I've taken very unpopular positions before when it was not very politically advantageous to do so. But don't just pull the trigger because it feels good and you want to do it now. Because guess what? It's going to feel good when you get your referendum scheduled, and it's going to feel like shit when you get beaten badly. You want to set yourself up, as Lucien Bouchard said, for winning conditions. Give yourself the best chance possible. That means giving a bit more time and letting this set of referendum questions go first, and give the rest of Canada, the provinces and the feds, a good faith period of time to negotiate reasonably. All right. All right. All right. I'm going to leave it at there. I actually have to get back to the rest of my job and try to run this shop here. But I've enjoyed the chat this morning. Oh, geez. I've been ignoring text messages from from John here. All right. Okay, well, I know we have that's because this was on X. George, he's got a long name here, but George, he says, aren't these referendum questions just proof that Smith is completely out of touch with the feelings of the majority of Albertans? They are either that simply her way of dodging responsibility to enact legislation will be criticized by those outside of Alberta. She says, George says, Smith has federal political ambitions. She knows that doing what needs to be done arbitrarily, as is her job, she will have these policies thrown back at her by her Eastern competitors when she runs federally. She wants to hide behind a referendum. If you want to say she's dodging taking a tough position by holding these referendum questions, maybe. You can make the argument. You can make it fairly on either side. As I said, I don't think there should be referendum questions on these immigration things. I think we should just do it. Do it yesterday. The constitutional questions, no, those are rightfully put towards a referendum. I do not agree, though, that she's got any kind of significant federal political ambitions and she's trying to appease in the East. A lot of pundits get it wrong about why Jason Kenney is no longer premier. They thought it was because of COVID. COVID was what pushed it over the top. But ultimately, it's because he always had his peripheral vision on Ottawa, that he saw the premier's chair of Alberta as the stepping stone, a way station on the way to the prime ministership. He was going to come back to Alberta, save Alberta, unite the parties, defeat the NDP, be popular, and then once the federal leadership, the Conservative Party comes open, he could hop over there. And it was self-evident to everyone. And it was, we kind of put up with it for a bit, but it became very obvious. You know, he talked a bit tough for Alberta, but wouldn't actually do anything. There's no way in hell he would have allowed a citizens' initiative referendum on independence. He has made clear, even very recently, he would never allow this. This is just not allowed. These people are hijacking the system. They're bad people. They should go away. Shut up. No referendum for you. He had his peripheral vision on Ottawa, and we could see that. And it became tiresome. And when we needed someone to really fight back against Ottawa on equalization, and then during COVID, he had nothing but words for Trudeau, really. Words and a few court interventions, but otherwise still followed the lead of Ottawa on COVID restrictions, vaccine passports, mandates, masking, all this crap. He followed their lead. We saw that. We don't see that from Smith. Smith is probably the least popular politician outside of Alberta. Even a lot of conservatives, right-wing conservatives in the East, don't like her because she's Alberta first. She might not be all the way there as a full Alberta nationalist supporting independence. She's not there. But she has been Alberta first. Hard for Alberta sovereignty. We got the Alberta Sovereignty Act, albeit a very watered-down one from what was originally promised during the leadership campaign. But we still got it. It was a significant action. I would have liked the original as proposed, but we still got something good there. We got the Citizens Initiative. The Citizens Initiative legislation making an independence referendum possible. I really just have a hard time squaring the accusation that she's got federal political ambitions with her actions, with her language. She would be wildly unelectable outside of Alberta. And I like that. Because I want my Alberta Premier to see the Alberta Premier's chair as the highest job. The way a Quebec nationalist sees being Quebec Premier as more important than being Canadian Prime Minister. I want my Premier, I want the Alberta Premier to see being Alberta Premier as more important than being Prime Minister. That's the top job. And she gives me that, she very much gives me, at least me, that impression. Tough on her sometimes. Earlier in the live stream, I was tougher on some things, but that's you don't even have to be that charitable to see it. Her opponents, I'll say, she's this crazy Alberta nationalist, closet separatist, Yahoo, shooting guns in the air. That her opponents see this, so people on her side should also see it for what it is. I don't think that's a fair accusation. I don't think, if I was her advisor and I am telling her, advising her on how she should prepare the way for a federal run, I would tell her to do the exact opposite of everything she's been doing here. So I have to respectfully disagree with you on that one. Okay, I'm going to we're going to pull the plug on it there. I want to thank you all for joining the show today. Also, if you're not watching live, I know a lot of you will watch after the fact, but all of those who watch live, thank you very much for your comments, your questions, and your call-ins. I got to get back to my job. That's it for today. Thank you very much for joining. Remember to go to westernstandard.news, click subscribe. It's $10 a month or $100 a year for unlimited access to all Western Standard content and to support the work that we're doing here in Alberta and across the West. Thank you very much for joining me, and God bless.